welcome to our final spring program for 2025. We are so happy you decided to join us in remembering this campus. A couple of reminders before we start. Menasha Historical Society takes the summer off from our formal programs, and instead we spend time with our partner organizations. We hope to see you at either an event such as the Twisted Pistons Cruise and Car Show in downtown Menasha in August, or maybe Porch Fest on Doty Island, or all of the other wonderful fun things that Menasha has to offer. Please watch our website and Facebook page for more information. We also have a YouTube channel for some of our other programs, and we hope to be adding more soon. Tonight's program is being recorded by the campus and by Menasha Historical Society. We want to thank both of them for recording everything for us. As for tonight's program, when I heard that this campus would be closing its doors, I, like many of you, were a little bit sad to hear about that. My family experience with the campus started back in the 1960s when my dad helped with some of the theater productions, first as a student and later as an instructor in the theater department. In fact, my own birth was announced in the faculty newsletter, which I have with me.
That's cute.
It is. Unfortunately, in the 1970s, my dad couldn't stay as an instructor in the theater department because his salary couldn't support his growing family. But he enjoyed working many, many years in the theater department, mostly with Ken Anderson. If we fast forward a few years, I also was a student here while I was still in high school. I earned both high school and college credit, which today is pretty common, but back in the 90s when I went, it wasn't as common. And then a few years later, I had an opportunity to work with a professor here on campus, Mr. Steve Sheehan. We worked together on a couple of exhibits for the Menasha Historical Society, and he was a great guy to work with. So when I saw the announcement of the closing of campus, I crossed my fingers and hoped and prayed, and I said, Steve, please, can you do a presentation with Menasha Historical Society? And lucky for us, he said yes. All right, so now a little bit more about Steve. Steve is currently a professor here at UWFox Cities. He has taught on campus for 22 years. He graduated from Sacramento State University and earned a master's degree from Cal State University, Los Angeles, and his PhD at Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana. Steve's academic interests and public focus is on U.S. political and cultural history in the mid-20th century. Steve developed an interest in local history and has conducted research, given numerous talks, and published essays on the history of the Fox cities, and they are always great. Steve lives in Appleton with his wife. He has 2 sons who grew up here in the Appleton area. He tells me he also started playing electric guitar last year, and he plans to be a rock star upon his retirement. With that, please help me welcome our speaker, Professor Steve Sheehan.
Thank you very much, Becky. I think that's the best introduction I've ever had, and probably will ever have, so I appreciate that. Thank you very much to the Menasha Historical Society for inviting me to do this. Thank you also to a few other people. I'll just get it up front. Our folks in the library. Anne is here. I do not see Lynette, but I was running around last minute slapping this thing together, and in true UWFox fashion, you know, they started pulling out photographs for me, wonderful ones, and scanning them, and very, very typical. Thank you for Tom for coming out of retirement to film tonight. Thanks for all the people who helped with setup. Some of them are here and some of them are not. So, and thank you all for coming. And many of you I know, and it's great to see you back again. Many of you I don't know, and so thank you for coming tonight. I hope I can do the campus justice. And so this was not easy to do this. This was difficult, and it's difficult because how do you pack nearly 100 years of an institution down into 45 minutes or so. But kind of difficult emotionally. And I guess what I would like to say is clearly the occasion is the campus closing. And we will be teaching our final classes here in person next Friday. But we're not here for a funeral. Let's treat this as a celebration of life, as they call it now. And so what I want to talk about tonight is I want to talk about the campus. And I want to talk about it as the embodiment of the Wisconsin idea. So that'll be one of our themes. The Wisconsin idea goes back about a century. And it's the notion, when applied to education, that the boundaries of the university are to reach the boundaries of the state. That the university is supposed to step out into the state and meet people where they're at and make their lives better. And I think that's exactly what this campus has done over the years. And so this is a place where you could get, and can still this week, get a world-class University of Wisconsin education from University of Wisconsin professors. And you can do that as a resident of Outagamie County, as a resident of Winnebago County, and that's what we've done for 90 years. Calumet County, Waupaca County, and boy, we have students who come from as far away as South Korea and Turkmenistan and China. And that's one thing that I think that this campus has done, and I think something we should celebrate. Beyond that, though, it's always been a cultural institution within the community. So it's not just about reaching students where they're at, but really bringing members of the community, non-students, onto campus, and also reaching out into the community to share knowledge, scholarship, the creative arts. And it's unique. I grew up in California, and we didn't have campuses like this. And in a lot of ways, it's unparalleled, this type of institution in the country. And the people who have carried out that mission on campus have received an enormous amount of support over the years. And we have received a tremendous amount of support from Winnebago County and from Outagamie County. And they should be thanked for everything they have done to support the campus. The cities of Menasha and the cities of Appleton have done things to support the campus. The state has supported the campus. The larger University of Wisconsin system has supported the campus, and that's been wonderful, and it wouldn't have happened without that support. On the other hand, those folks haven't always gotten along with one another, and that's often made life difficult here. And there have been times when certain individuals in some of those institutions who have been in positions to be allies haven't been very good allies. And unfortunately, that's part of the story too. And I don't want to dwell on that too much tonight, but it really is part of the story. So let's get this out of the way first. A lot of you probably are very familiar with the campus, right? I know a lot of you have worked here longer than me. I think most of you are familiar with the campus. What year did we start offering classes? Where do we trace our history back to? Do you know?
1937?
Close. 53. 1933 from the former dean of the campus, right? And we in 2008 we celebrated the 75th anniversary of the campus, going back to 1933. Well, one of the things I discovered as I was putting this presentation together this week is that's a lie. Or maybe just a mistake. So the University of Wisconsin began offering extension classes in 1933 out in communities. And they asked to offer extension classes in Menasha, but if you look, this is a post-Crescent article, a brief little blurb. It says it is, in 1933, it's now definitely known that there will be no university extension courses offered for Menasha students this year because there wasn't demand for it. There wasn't adequate demand. And it's not until 5 years later in 1938 that we first start offering classes as the Menasha extension of the University of Wisconsin. What got me was I know that classes were offered initially when we first started offering classes as an institution. They were offered at the Menasha High School campus. And that high school wasn't built until 1938. And the prior one was in a different location and had burned down in 1936. So I'm thinking, it seems like if we were offering classes in 1936 at an institution that burnt down, that we would have known about that and nobody ever talked about it. And it turns out this campus of Menasha High School got up and running in the spring of 1938, and it was the following fall when UW started offering classes there. So I had to make a correction to the title, and so it's really 87 years of service to the community. And then also, we kind of put things on pause for 4 years because of World War II. So from the fall of 42 until the spring of 46, there were actually no classes. So if you do the math again, it brings it down to 83, and then that's calendar years. So in the end, it's 82 academic years has been the history of this campus. So I was originally 10 years off, but it's 82 academic years all totaled with a little break in between. So the Wisconsin idea, and I'll move fairly quickly through this. This is a picture of Charles Van Hise. Charles Van Hise was a longtime president of the University of Wisconsin. And when he was president, the University of Wisconsin was the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and that was it. And he had this idea that the university ought to reach out into other parts of the state and meet people where they're at. It's a quote from a speech he gave in 1904, and so he's often credited with coming up with this Wisconsin idea. And certainly he's instrumental. I mean, there's lots of evidence that it goes further back than that. So in fact, in this picture, he's sitting in Bascom Hall, is where his office was. The Bascom is John Bascom, who was his professor and mentor, who also had ideas about that sort of thing, and it's probably where Van Hise developed his ideas. He was also Bob La Follette's mentor, and Van Hise worked with Bob La Follette, and it went along with progressive politics in the state at the turn of the 20th century too. And so Van Hise's idea was that the universities should serve the needs of the people in the state. And it was this very progressive notion of what education was. And I mean progressive in terms of it was forward-thinking for the time, but progressive also of that progressive era around the turn of the 20th century. One of the things that progressive reformers wanted to do throughout the United States is they wanted to apply research and expertise and analysis to social problems in a way that could really improve people's lives. And that's where Van Hise was coming from. In 1906, he set up the Extension Division of the University of Wisconsin. So we've officially got an Extension Division, and out of that, this campus would eventually grow. Initially, what they were doing was more of like what we think of as kind of like credit or non-credit outreach sort of stuff. So sending, a faculty member from Madison out into the sticks in Appleton or something to do a lecture or something like that. And there were really harsh critics. And this is one of those examples of sometimes you think the people that should be your allies just aren't. The harshest critics were on the faculty on the University of Wisconsin campus. And this is kind of a theme. And number one, they were worried about losing students. If we're going to take education out into the rest of the state, then maybe they won't all go to Madison. They were very concerned about that. Alternatively, right, and this is kind of, it's oxymoronic, they also felt that there was no way to actually offer a legitimate college education off the grounds of that University of Wisconsin-Madison campus. So we're going to steal their students, but they're not going to get a good education when they're stolen. And then they also said like it was getting the university into entertainment. You know, if you're giving non-credit instruction, that's just entertainment. And so the idea was it's going to cheapen the University of Wisconsin brand name. So lots of opposition on the campus. Another key player was this guy here, Charles McCarthy, in the early years. He's best known for building the first state legislative reference library. So he created a reference library for the state legislature of Wisconsin to use. And again, it's progressive thinking. What he thought is that knowledgeable people with access to good information, the ability to analyze it, that they should be writing laws instead of the lobbyists who were largely writing the laws at the time in the state of Wisconsin. He also got into legislating himself. So he had lots of friends and allies on the legislature, and he did some writing of laws himself. In 1911, he wrote this law that created a system of vocational high schools in Wisconsin. So places in high schools where you could get vocational technical training. And he was a big advocate of of providing opportunities and a chance to become more skilled for working class people. He's a big advocate of the working class. But then he put in there this stipulation that these vocational high schools out in Menasha or where have you, if they could get 30 students and someone on the ground willing to pay the bills for the electricity and stuff, that this new University of Wisconsin extension would pay for the faculty and send the faculty out. And so that's in 1911, and so that's really the seed of what eventually would become the two-year campuses, the two-year colleges. So by the end of the teens, there's a pretty good extension program where it's a combination of credit outreach stuff, but then one of the things that happened is in Milwaukee, there was just so much demand for education for people who either wouldn't or couldn't or didn't want to travel to Madison, that it evolved into what they called an extension center, where they started offering 4-credit classes. And that's really the first of the two-year campuses was in Milwaukee. That then evolved into, it merged with the State College in Milwaukee and evolved into UW-Milwaukee now. So that brings us back to the beginning. It's not until 1933 that the University of Wisconsin Extension got really ambitious about trying to offer 4-credit classes around the state. And they picked about 9 different centers where they wanted to offer 4-credit classes. Menasha was one of them, ultimately didn't work out. The context here is the Great Depression. And probably about 50% unemployment in 1933 for young adults and teenagers. The national unemployment rate that year was 25%, but for young adults, teenagers, probably upwards of 50%. So you have all of these young people graduating high school, and they can't do what high school kids in that generation did, which is go get jobs. And so they'd like to go to college, but they're from poor families who are struggling financially, so there's no way that they can go to Madison. So the idea is let's bring the education out to them. And it really took off. Eventually, so I guess people in Menasha decided in 38, hey, let's start doing this. And so you get your first freshman extension center is what it's called in Menasha in 1938. And they offered 4 sets of classes. So you could enroll there as a University of Wisconsin first-year student. You could take English courses, you could take European history, you could take Spanish, and you could take geography. And this is actually a photograph of that era. This is from the spring of 1942, so this is the last year that Menasha Extension met before it closed for World War II. What we have here is a Spanish class. So the classes are offered in Menasha High School. A Spanish class at the Extension did a play in Spanish for Menasha High School students. And I bet it was a wonderful play. I bet the acting was a number one, right? In a language that they're all learning for the first time. So you've got this center that kind of takes root, and they had a basketball team as far back as the 1930s too. This is the thing about basketball, right? Of all sports, it's the easiest one. You need 5 warm bodies, and you need a ball, and that's it, right? If you can borrow a gym, and someone always lets you use their gym. And so places like this have there's this long tradition of basketball as the sport. Soccer actually is another really good one, right? A ball, 11 people, and some kind of field somewhere, and we've actually had very good soccer teams over the years. And so then what happened is World War II. Right? And as of the fall of 1942, there just isn't demand anymore for this kind of education. So these centers, most of them shut down. Menasha was one that did. And they shut down for the duration of the war. And then the war ended, World War II ended, and the enrollment at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in the fall of 1945, so right, that's kind of as the war is coming to an end, it was under 8,000. And then you always lose students if you've worked at a university, right? You lose students from fall to spring, right? They drop off like flies. Well, it was 8,000 in the fall of 45. By the spring of 1946, as the U.S. Army is being demobilized, that enrollment there had jumped over 12,000. So between the fall and the spring semester, it goes up by over 50%, and they're just bursting at the seams in Madison. And so at this point, they revived this extension program. There were a few of these extension centers that were still limping along, and they revived them, and then they opened a bunch of new ones, opened ones in places where they had closed. So for the fall of 1946, there were 30 of these freshman extension centers around the state. They're everywhere. Including, again, back in Menasha, about 2/3 of the students were veterans. They offered the same sorts of classes that they offered in the 1930s, added a few: political science, botany, zoology, definitely more science. And I mean, this is also, I think, another theme with the University of Wisconsin-Fox Valley is we make it up as we go along, right? We're told, hey, this might happen, figure it out, and then you do. And the idea here really was probably that this is a one-year deal. The idea was we can't take any new students in Madison. So we're going to take all our freshmen, we're going to spread them around the state. And then that's just going to be the one big lump, and then we'll shut these centers down, we'll get everybody back in Madison again. And it just didn't work out that way. So in the next year, 1947, Menasha added a sophomore year of curriculum. Enrollment went up. And now the number of students, the number of veterans in the student population dropped to 50% and continued to fall through the rest of the decade. And so it's at this point that it becomes a viable institution and has been offering academic credit in the Fox Cities ever since, right? So from then on. Got a picture here of the president of Oshkosh State Teachers College. This photo's from about 1959. But he was president of Oshkosh State Teachers College in 1946 when the Menasha Extension opened. Also one opened in Fond du Lac. And he's probably the harshest critic of them in the area. And his criticism is they're going to steal students away from Oshkosh. So there's an irony there, right? He doesn't like Fond du Lac, he doesn't like Oshkosh, and then that's where we end up in the end. You know, and it really looks like this vibrant place in the 1940s and the 1950s. This is just something I stumbled across researching in the newspapers. Again, they had a basketball team. And, I mean, there was a lot of enthusiasm about the basketball teams at these extension centers. And again, there's like dozens of them. And so this guy pictured here, Bud Foster, he's in the Basketball Hall of Fame. Great player at the University of Wisconsin, and then a longtime coach. And he got together with the various coaches at these extensions, and he hosted a tournament in Madison for these extensions. But this was also a time when first-year students, basketball players, usually didn't play varsity at a big school like Madison. So he had a freshman team, and he also entered them into this tournament. That freshman team from Madison proceeded to wallop every team they played. But at the first year in 1948, the Menasha Extension team, they did come in second place. And they lost, was it 79 to 47, so fairly lopsided. And then this is really interesting, and I hope none of his relatives are here or anything, but this Block UWFox Whip Extension for title. Block is the last name of a kid from Menasha. He was I guess, a great high school player at Menasha High. I think he was all-state. And he's a freshman in Madison that year, so he gets to meet his old buddies from the extension, and they just beat up on him. Well, it turns out the next year he's at the extension, and I come across his name, and there's an article about the poor kid in the newspaper, and it's about what a great basketball player he is and how unfortunate it is because he's academically ineligible and he can't play in this tournament. And then he kind of disappears. I think he went off and got a job somewhere. I don't think college was his thing. So yeah, there's this kind of thriving student life. We've got a music festival that brings the extension centers together, and this idea, it just kind of takes off. Student council, 1948. So really by the end of the 1940s, early 1950s, there's this viable system of freshman and sophomore campuses around the state. And then they started threatening to close them. So this is a headline from 1953, Menasha may lose their extension center at a time when, I mean, again, students are kind of bursting at the seams there. Governor of the state at the time, Walter Kohler, it's a picture of him from 1951 when he was first inaugurated. In 1951 was a budget year, and he wanted to cut the budget, the University of Wisconsin budget. He was looking at curbing spending. The state had been overspending. Tax rates were going up. Wanted to cut University of Wisconsin's budget. The president at the time of the University of Wisconsin was this guy named Edwin Fred. And when the governor proposed a budget cut, what Fred decided to do was say, well, we're going to have to close those centers then. So again, like this is the campus's ally in Madison, right? Is Mr. Fred, and his first instinct is say, well, let's start accessing these centers, and Menasha's one that's going to close. There's 9 still operating at the time, and they're going to have to close 5 of them. And then there's this football. It just goes back and forth. You can trace it through the newspapers over the next few months. The governor says none of these centers are going to close. He comes out and says none of them are going to close. And he says Fred's just using this as a negotiating ploy. He's trying to kind of put the screws on the governor. The legislature ends up passing the budget bill, and in that budget bill, they put in a resolution saying don't close any of these University of Wisconsin centers. That's not binding. The president could still do it, but he'd be bucking the legislature if he did. So they say don't close any. And the other thing they did is they restored a lot of the proposed cuts. So it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. But this will be a pattern now for the next however many years. By the middle of the 1950s, I mean, right around that time, the campus is still located on the campus of Menasha High School. The extension is located at Menasha High School. And they're bursting out the seams. And again, this is when kind of World War II becomes important, because what's happening by the mid and late 1950s is the baby boomers are starting to hit high school. So that space that the university has been using in the high school, well, now the high school needs it. So it's less about the student population at the university increasing, and it's more about the high school population increasing and squeezing out the university. So they actually bought a building. They bought what was called the Jensen Medical Center in downtown Menasha and used that for several years. I think it's 57 to 60. That's in use. And they're split between this location downtown and the high school. This is the schedule from 1958 and 1959. You can't read it closely, but when I read that schedule, it looks like there were 2 rooms. Your class is either in room A or room B. So they added 2 rooms. There's still some classes at the vocational high school. So now the idea is that we need our own space. And the dean starts talking about, well, we need to get our own space. And that's how you get this location where we're standing here. This was an adventure too. So really this kind of came as a push from the grassroots level. Citizens, residents in the community wanted a campus. There were avid supporters in Winnebago County and in Outagamie County and government in Menasha and in Appleton. Eventually, a bunch of citizens came together and they formed a private foundation. This is just a private foundation, and they bought the land. Ultimately, what they bought was much of this site. They've bought up more over the years. And then Outagamie and Winnebago County together paid for the construction. And that has been the case ever since, right? It's been those two counties that have paid for the physical space of this building. Something that I didn't know, there was no water or sewer out here. I mean, I think we were out in the middle of a field, right, at that time. And the city of Appleton ran the water and the sewer lines and paid for it. And part of it is because it was a center for the Fox cities or the Fox Valley, and so Appleton kicked in. The idea was that the state would then pay for the equipment to fill it out, the tables and the cameras and such. 3 sites were proposed. So there was a citizens committee in Menasha, and they wanted it in Menasha. And they wanted the campus just a little ways down the road, I think on what is now AP. They had a site over there within the city of Menasha. There were residents of Outagamie County who wanted to place it in Kaukauna. And they were going to build it in Kaukauna, and they thought that was the right place to go. And then it was a citizens committee from Appleton who proposed this site as kind of a compromise, and as they saw it being halfway between Menasha and Appleton, they thought would be the right location for the campus. And I think that was. I mean, I think ultimately that was probably about the best site they could have built it at the time. So yeah, when it's finally built in 1960, this is the headline in the Post-Crescent. I love it. The center is the product of many rivalries. And boy, there was some bitter fighting about this. The text of the article, the ways and means to provide a new building where it should be created a conflict between Outagamie and Winnebago counties, which for a time made the success of the project questionable. I mean, the counties really had a hard time coming to an agreement on where it would be located, who would be paying how much for what. And they eventually did, though, on this site. The state then paid for the equipment and grumbled about it. So by now it's Governor Nelson, Gaylord Nelson, a fan favorite, and it was reported as saying if a city wants a state college, then there needs to be a full dress debate and a formal legislative act to do it. And didn't like that they just kind of built their own college up here. The UW Regents said they could, and so really grumbled about having to hand over the equipment. And it did so only because they were legally obligated. There was a law that basically said that they had to do that. Another really funny thing is as of January of 1960, the campus is under construction. It starts in late 1959, and they're working like mad even into the winter of 1960. And the builders are complaining because they're having to truck all their water in because the city hasn't got the water line out here yet. Appleton's supposed to give them water, and they hadn't done it. And the city of Appleton said, well, we just thought we needed to get it out there by September for the start of school. And the builders, the contractors, they need water, right? They want water. And then it was packed. I mean, so now we've got the baby boom starting to hit college campuses, and boy, you look at pictures of it from the 1960s, and it's bursting at the seams. The original building lasts for 3 years when they make a massive addition to it, or a big, solid addition to it in 1963. And it becomes this thriving campus. Speaking of the 60s, Probably familiar with this guy, Martin Luther King. Had won the Nobel Prize in 1964, among other things. In 1967, he came and he visited this campus and he spoke here. Interesting point in the civil rights movement and in King's career as a leader and an activist. So he had risen to prominence in the 1950s with the Montgomery bus boycott, and then had essentially been anointed the leader of the civil rights movement, and had taken on that role. Well, by the middle of the 1960s, the civil rights movement had accomplished a lot of what it set out to accomplish in terms of actually overturning legalized segregation in the southern states. But clearly, right, there's still a problem in the United States. And there's economic inequality, there's de facto segregation. So he continues to push on, and in '66 he came north. And he went to Chicago and he got involved in what was called the Chicago Freedom Movement, working with people in Chicago at the time. It was kind of an emphasis on fair housing in the north, right? So yeah, we might not have formal segregation at lunch counters in the South anymore, but there's housing segregation in places like Chicago. So he's working on fair housing, and then in April of 1967, he gave this speech that he called "Beyond Vietnam, a Time to Break the Silence." And King had been a quiet opponent of the Vietnam War really from the outset, but in public had stayed quiet about it because he didn't want to alienate people like John Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson, who were supporting the civil rights movement and then also trying to carry out the Vietnam War. Well, he decides to break his silence in '67. So it's that version of Martin Luther King that ends up in Menasha. He was really looked like he was trying to merge the established civil rights movement with the burgeoning anti-war peace movement of the late 1960s. In late April, he spoke at the University of Minnesota. So he seems to have been doing a Midwestern tour. The day before this, was it? He spoke in Wausau, or was it on the very same day? Same day. During the day, and then in the evening, he made his way to Menasha. Newspaper coverage noted that there was a heavy security team. At this point in his life, King had become very unpopular because he had become more radical, and there were lots of threats coming from lots of folks. And so there was really heavy security. The Menasha police turned out and provided security. The color photograph is one that's taken by someone in the Menasha Police Department. Talked mostly about fair housing and about the Vietnam War. Gave a speech to about 600 attendees. I guess there was overflow from the theater and they had to do closed circuit in another room. Did a press conference afterwards. This is my favorite newspaper headline. I thought about titling the presentation this, not the text. So we have this other two-year college in the area, right? And they do great things. They provide a technical education. But over the years, there's been this tendency sometimes to conflate the two. And I can't tell you the number of times where I've told people where I work, and they say, oh, I love the tech. And I say, I do too. It's a great place, isn't it? So this campus had an image problem, the sense was, over the years. And some of the image problems was, one, sometimes people just didn't know about it. Sometimes people conflated it with the extension or the tech or something like that. One of the criticisms is that it was 13th grade. You know, it's if you don't want to go to real college, you can go to the center. You know, I've talked to students over the years about their perceptions of this place. And one of the things that I've always been heartened to hear is they always say, I heard it's really hard. And from a student, that's a compliment, right? We're not trying to make it difficult. But I mean, what they mean is rigorous. And so I think that message was always out there. And you might not be able to join the cool fraternity. You might not be on a Big Ten basketball team. There might not be keg parties every weekend. But one thing you're going to do is you're going to get an education if you want to. There's the opportunity to learn there. Campus was criticized over the years for not having a lot of student life, and it didn't compared to a place like Madison or even a place like Oshkosh. And it's understandable. It was an almost exclusively non-residential campus. Just recently, over the last decade or so, we've had limited campus housing, but it's non-residential, so the students don't live here, they commute. They're only here for 2 years if they do well instead of 4. So there's less time to build organizations, there's less continuity. And then from the very beginning, I mean, going back to the 1930s and the 1940s, they had jobs, they had lives, and so there used to be a lot of talk of non-traditional students, and what that meant was an older student, like over the age of 22, I think is the cutoff. And a traditional student is that 18 to 22-year-old student, and I feel like the students on this campus, in a good way, were always non-traditional, even our traditional students. They weren't necessarily like, the kind of a carbon copy, cookie cutter, sorority girl, fraternity guy type students. And they did their own thing, and they had their own lives. There was a campus life always. Centerfest in the 1980s. I wish I could have been here in the 1980s for Centerfest, which was an outreach event on the campus. I imagine some of you probably remember it. That was kind of part carnival, part learning opportunity, and just, boy, looked like really great, wholesome Midwestern fun. And we've got some sort of a drama organization putting on a show. This is also another black and white picture of Centerfest. And even here, this is a very recent picture of a campus picnic. And so by the time I got here, we no longer had Centerfest, but God, we had some really good campus picnics. And some of you probably remember Jeff Kipper, and I was just talking about this the other day. Jeff Kipper was the one who put on these picnics, and they were amazing. I mean, there were Ferris wheels and bounce houses, and you could dress up as a sumo wrestler, and there were pugill sticks, and there were entertainment. There were these like notable acts. I remember one year he got this act called the Britons. And they're a Beatles cover band. My lovely wife Shoma is here, and you bought us tickets to see the Britons a couple of years ago. How much did you pay for them? Do you remember? Was it like 20s, 30s, 40s? No recollection at all? Well, I got to see them originally for free here, and in fact, we never did see it. We bought tickets, and we were going to go see the Britons in Elkhart Lake, and then it turned out it was on the same night as a Packer playoff game. So it's like, screw the Britons, right? I'm watching the Packers. So we did that instead. But I did get to see them way back here. And what Jeff would do, and again, this is so in keeping with the spirit of this university, there are these national acts that kind of tour and visit college campuses and make their living that way. And the activities directors, student life directors on campuses, they go to these conventions and conferences where they meet with these acts and they sign deals with them to bring them in the next year. And what Jeff would do is he would go to these conferences and he would find the acts that were signing with other universities in the area. And then he would get them to come here at like a steep discount. And so we would get these really good, notable nationally touring acts that Jeff would bring here on a shoestring. And it was, I mean, this really cool thing that he did. I think obviously more important than that, and what was always at the heart of what this campus was, who we were, was this, right? Instruction and learning. I'm looking back, and I think I've probably in my career here had about 4,500 students. And most people who spend a career here have interacted with that many students. There've probably been, I don't know, close to 100,000 that have gone through the extension, the center, UWFox Valley, UWOFox cities. We've got these three pictures here in very divergent disciplines. And so we've got a computer science class, we've got what looks like a music appreciation class, we've got an art class. But there's certain things that they hold in common, and you can even see them in these pictures. And it's creativity, stimulating people's thought, it's engagement, and a quality engagement between an individual instructor and individual students. And it's quality instruction. I love this picture of you, Linda. We have Linda Zimmerman, the back of her head there. Do you know what you said to make this entire, if you can't see in the back, this whole class is laughing except there's a kid in a green t-shirt back there. It looks like he might be asleep. But you're at 99%, and that's really good. Do you have any idea what you said? Okay. So you promised them you'd play the piano? And that's probably why and so you were going to play it that time, you think? Okay. And then Ahilan is not here, our computer scientist. Judith is here, Judith Waller in the back there too. And so those 100,000 students that have come through here, most of them have stayed local, right? And that's one of the things you get from a place like this. And they've become, not historians, right? I don't know that I've taught any future historians. Some of them become artists or musicians or computer scientists. But a lot of them have become teachers, police officers, bankers, insurance agents, nurses, parents, friends, colleagues, volunteers. And think of the value added to the community, right? All of them come out of here more knowledgeable, smarter, better, more skilled. Another really important thing that this campus always strived to do is outreach. And a lot of the time that meant bringing people in, like getting people to come in here. I never had the pleasure of meeting Ken Anderson. This is an article that was written and published in the Postcards at the time of his death. And I mean, as far as I can tell, he built theater in the Valley and is credited with that. And that's the theme in this article. One of his proteges is a woman named Susan Rabideau, who many of you have heard of, who essentially went on to do the same thing for the next, 20 years after he retired. And I mean, some of these plays are really good. And one of the things that's remarkable about them is they mobilize students as cast and as crew, and students get credit, but then they also bring in people from the community. We have Dave Jordahl here, who created the Communiversity Band, is what they called it, and does the same thing. And I was amazed to see that when I got here, that we have students, but then we also have people that we've just brought in from the community, and they work together. The Weiss Earth Science Museum and the Barlow Planetarium are also obviously institutions that have brought people here. This is a picture of the solar eclipse in 2017, and people kind of hanging out in front of the Barlow at the time. Alan Page was director, and a very, very good one. In addition to bringing people into the community, the university also reached out into the community. These are two fairly recent pictures of water sampling and testing. I assume this is probably Teresa Wegler's class. I know Teresa Gagno is a longtime biology professor here, did the same thing. And so how many thousands of people, were inspired by the music, the art, became more knowledgeable about the earth, the universe, the stars, have cleaner water, been offered a helping hand because of this university. It's a tremendous amount of value added. Oh, and then, oh, by the way, a lot of the people who worked here over the years just did a lot of quiet, lonely, creative, and scholarly work. Mike O'Brien was here from the 1980s up to the 2000s. He's up there in the top corner. It's a picture of him from the Door County Pulse. He was a historian. People always say, oh, you replaced Mike O'Brien. And I say, no, I didn't. No, I didn't. I work where he worked for a long time, but that's it. Author of 9 different books, a prolific author. And some of them like seminal works on local favorite Joe McCarthy, another local favorite Vince Lombardi. Did this massive biography of John F. Kennedy after he had retired. While he was still working here, completed it after he retired. Bigginess Livingstone was a notable artist and painter in the community, worked here for decades. Beth Johnson, holding up her edited volume on women in geology, and we have Beth here. Oh, and I was wondering if you were wearing the same shirt, because I knew there was purple in the shirt. That would have been great.
I'll grant you, I don't change my outfits that often.
So, I mean, this has really been at the heart of who we were, right? That instruction, outreach, and scholarship. Not quite the end, because I don't want to end on a sour note, but it's another example of having, I don't want to say enemies, but maybe not terribly reliable allies. So the most recent change and shakeup to the system that we've been in is back in 2017, the university president, Ray Cross, decided that the 2-year campuses should merge with the 4-year campuses. And there were 13 2-year campuses at the time in the state, and they were all farmed out to some of the comprehensive colleges. We, along with UW-Fond du Lac, were the 2 2-year campuses that were merged with UW-Oshkosh. And so since 2018, we have been a campus of the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh. When he announced this plan, what the president said is that what we needed to do is plan for the future now, be increasingly bold in our efforts to get more students through the educational pipeline to help meet Wisconsin needs. We must do this by improving access to higher education and keeping it affordable for students and families. At other times, he's quoted as saying, it's important that the 2-year colleges maintain their identity and their access missions within their communities. This was a plan, he says, that was proposed in order to keep the 2-year campuses open. And if you're at all familiar from the inside, none of that is true. I mean, it was no intent to improve access, no intent to maintain a presence in communities, and I think ultimately, really very little intent to keep the campuses open. I would only be speculating if I were to talk about what I thought his actual motives were. Wisconsin, I think, currently ranks 42nd in the nation on higher education spending per capita. We're in the midst of a demographic shift where there are fewer students. And when you are relying on student tuition instead of state aid and you have far, far fewer students, something's got to give. I'm concerned not only about this campus closing, but I'm concerned that the 2-year campuses in the state of Wisconsin are the canaries in the coal mine. And I think there's a good chance that the future of public education in the United States could be one that is very expensive to its users and very distant. And might look a lot like what higher education looked like in the United States prior to World War II, where the sons and daughters of the upper middle class who've got the time and the money and the privilege get to go to a 4-year residential campus and get an education. And then the rest of us are to make do. And so I really do worry about that. And I think it's tragic what's happened here. 2 people pictured here, I just really embodied this campus. On the left is Lila Locksmith. She was born in 1912 in Appleton. She went to college at Lawrence, got a graduate degree, a master's degree at Madison, and then she came to work on the Extension campus in 1946 and worked until 1987. So basically from World War II to the Iran-Contra scandal, she was on this campus. It's amazing. Taught foreign languages, French, but mostly Spanish, but then also just was everywhere. So if you look ever for a news story about the center or the extension from about the 40s into the early 80s, she pops up and did all kinds of administration work, was kind of an informal spokesperson for the campus a lot of time. I know she was an informal historian who gathered a lot of information about the campus. In 2013, at the age of 101, she was welcomed back to this campus, and they dedicated this room to her. And so until I think it was about 2 days ago, this was called Lila Locksmith Huberty Hall. But we're taking everything off the walls, and so that's now going away. And I think she really personifies how this campus has been rooted in this community over the years. I think she's the best personification of that. On our right, we've got Martin Rudd. Very, very different story. Born in Cornwall, England, 1970. Educated at the University of Warwick, where he got his PhD as an inorganic chemist. He did postdoctoral work in Norway. Migrated to the United States in the late 90s. In 2002, he got a job teaching as an assistant professor of chemistry in Marathon County. And 2 years later, came down to the better campus here in the Fox Cities. By 2011, he was our campus dean, chief executive officer. He was in charge here. He was also a national leader within his profession and his discipline, really active in the American Chemical Society, it's the academic society for chemists. One of the most notable things I think he did as dean was as he built the international student program here, which has been really important influence on this campus. Basically, it brought thousands of international students, a lot of them from Asia, South Korea, Japan, and China over the last decade or so. And he really personifies how this campus brings the world into this community, I think, better than anybody else. And then finally, there's Jim Egan, pictured here. It's an old picture of Jim Egan from the 80s on the left. He came to campus in 1980 as the assistant to the dean. He eventually was promoted to financial manager, but that does not at all capture Jim Egan, who he was as a person or what he did for this campus, because he did so much. There was a big expansion of the campus in the 1980s, absolutely necessary to expand and modernize this campus. I think it would have died without it. And when you read the newspaper articles, Jim's always there at the table. You have to read further down because Jim's never in the headline, right? And Jim was never in the headlines. But if you read down, then they start to talk to Jim and they quote Jim. And I can only imagine his presence, right? His calming presence, his ability to build bridges at these really contentious meetings where the counties are trying to get the other county to pay more for the campus. And one of his first jobs was he actually was the organizer of the Centerfest events. And this is Jim. I never had any idea that he did that. but he kind of dreamed it up and organized them. This is Jim on the far left here. They, I guess, dressed up as gangsters. There's young Terry Nyman there, the dean at the time, Bob Young on the right. And this was in the midst of another budget battle within the UW system, and they were going down to Madison to get our money, and dressed up as gangsters. And again, that's Jim. Here's Jim in 1982, and he's in the campus play, and he's the lead. He's Randall McMurphy. In One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, I never knew Jim was an actor. Here he is at 1985 Centerfest playing the tuba. Did he play in the band with you?
No.
No, but there's some kind of Dixieland jazz band here, and that's Jim on the tuba, right? On top of that, he worked tirelessly for the United Way. He was a beekeeper. The man did everything, and he was a kind and a decent and an incredibly generous person and a joy to be around. And he really enjoyed making people's lives better. And I think more than anybody else, right, he personified this campus. And then I just ran across this today. So this is at the dedication of this hall to Lila Locksmith Huberty. Here she is, 101 years young, seeing this hall dedicated to her name. We have Martin cutting the ribbon, and we have Jim pushing the wheelchair. And I think if there's ever been a picture of the Wisconsin idea, right there it is, those three folks. So thank you very much for humoring me this evening. Yeah, I really appreciate everybody coming out. Do we want to field questions? We've gone a little over time. Yeah, I'd be happy to have people share. I'd be happy to field questions. There are also a lot of other people in the room that would be able to field questions. So, I welcome anybody to give their input. Yeah, Beth, go ahead.
Not a question, but a comment.
Yeah, sure.
The work that you featured in the picture of me, just to illustrate to everybody the impact that research done here at UW-Fox Valley has affected the nation. I just got an email from somebody today who wants to get a copy of that very book, send it to me, and have me autograph it. So I just want to put that out there because being at a two-year campus like this, we often get treated like we are other. But then you have moments like that shows not only the value that we have, the reach that we have, but the fact that this campus always supported us doing the things that might feel like they were a little crazy, but can have huge impacts. And that's just a really great example of that.
Thanks, Beth. Rosemary?
Another great example, Martin Rudd, his research before going to the dark side of administration. He actually worked with the Space Consortium. He was working on literally the NASA's program for his portion of it was trying to get the metals that were used on the ceramic plates of the shuttle to be better heat resistant. Another person in Madison was also working on adhesives so the plates wouldn't fall off. So the point is, on a two-year campus, he was doing research that was published that helped keep the shuttle from burning up, from re-entry. He was a terrific man. He was I'm into scouting. The point is, he was a Queen Scout. He backed my program from the moment I asked him about it.
Yeah, he was the Queen Scout is the English equivalent of the
Of an
Eagle
Eagle Scout, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. He was terrific.
George and then Tina and then.
I was just going to make another comment that builds on what you said earlier about the quality of education that students got. We as instructors, as professors, also got a tremendous opportunity to learn from one another. We were actually national leaders in collaborative education, learning communities that combined interdisciplinary professors who would teach, and students really took on that and took that sort of infectious nature that, hey, our professors are also learning from one another while we're learning from them. And our ability to do this on this campus was enhanced by the fact that it's one building, we were running into each other every day in the halls, and able to sort of, you know, hey, would you give a guest lecture on this? Because I think it would dovetail really nice with what I'm talking about. We could do that so easily here, and I think it worked wonderfully.
Thanks, George. Tina, you go
I was
ahead.
thinking a lot about Martin yesterday. They dedicated a room
Yeah.
in Dempsey Hall at Oshkosh. But I remember starting here as an advisor. And a student came in struggling with chemistry. And this is before he was an administrator. And he said, Tina, set her down. I'll help her. But that was the universal theme with everyone that worked in this building, is that there was a dedication to the students and learning like no other. And then I think about Jim, because as a young advisor, he taught me to be fair and consistent. Every day I quote him that, okay, if I'm going to do this for you, I have to do it for all. So this legacy of this place is so real, not only in the students, but in the professionals that worked here. And I think the biggest thing is we did really good work, guys. Really good work.
Well, to lighten things a little bit, we had a set of twins, and I don't know where they ever got the idea, but they wanted to go to the Y. They were 2.5, and they wanted to learn foreign languages. Why? I don't know. I mean, I know a little Spanish. My husband knows nothing, right, honey? He's forgotten. And so they went to the Y. That's where it was offered. And they said, well, our teacher teaches us Spanish and French. And I said, well, you don't read. How do you do it? Well, she sings songs, and we learn things through the songs. And so I thought, well, that's nice. They were little Suzuki violinists and whatnot. But it became such a hassle because we'd sit down in the dining room, and we couldn't pass them anything unless we said it in Espanol. Mantequilla, and then we got the butter. But they started speaking in French and Spanish, and we never knew the name of the teacher. It was Lily Puberty. And Brandon said, Mom, she's the happiest person in the whole world, and she loves each one of us. And, you know, they were not plugged into any particular political theory or whatever. They just knew that she was kind of that omniscient person who loved everybody, and to be teaching a pack of 2-, 3-, and 4-year-olds a foreign language because she loved it. She had to have it in her veins, in her bone marrow. But we just think the world of her. Yeah, it was really great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'd like to speak to the value that this campus home has had on young people, because I was one of those 22-year-old non-traditional students. I had a young family. I had a 2-year-old who Wendy Egan had in their child care, and because of my situation and living locally, this was the perfect place for me. And it took me a little more than 2 years to finish, but I was also able to do work study. So I was a big part of the library system here with April Cambries, and during the time of the move and renovation, and hauling on book trucks things over to Maplewood. If anybody remembers
yeah, we've got
that,
good pictures of those
that was
too.
a lot of fun. So for me, the 1980s were the best time to be here. They were perfect for a young person like me who didn't hop right into school, and I could probably list every single faculty member that I had. And Mike O'Brien was my advisor here. I thought the world of him. Linda is one of my absolute favorite people in the whole world. I love you, Linda. Dave, played in a quintet for my second wedding. So, you know, I made friends with faculty even as a young person. I always felt connected here. And it's a difficult time. It's a difficult time for people who worked here. I worked here in the library. But for those of us who were students and found that this was the best fit for what they needed, and it took me another couple years to transfer, but then I did go to GB, and I am a teacher, and this place was my home. So I
Great,
thank you for giving us this opportunity.
Thank you. Yes.
I apologize, I'm kind of an odd person out here. I actually never went to UWFox. I am a product of UW two-year college system. I went to UW Washington County. Myself, a few other donors, as well as a professor at UW-Rock, Ken Broski, produced a documentary called Closure, the Dismantling of the Two-Year Colleges. If you haven't watched it, watch it for free on YouTube. That's my shameless plug. There is a part 2 to the documentary which covers the UW-Fox closure. If anybody wants to share their story, I'd be more than happy to hear it. I think that, and just really quick for me to add, please just bear with me as I ramble on. I swear to God, it's worth it. I don't really think that people understand why the Wisconsin idea is so damn important to our state and how historically important it is. You know, I think that in order to really understand it, I swear this will be over in maybe 3 or 4 minutes, but literally when we first started and when, you know, UW-Madison first headed this up, you know, it was an agricultural school, and Wisconsin was a grain-producing state. Now, the thing that stinks about producing wheat is that it depletes the soil of nutrients, so it's not sustainable. So we could have headed down the economic route of Kansas or North Dakota. However, the people in the state government realized that we needed to diversify our product offering, and they really focused on the dairy industry, which at that time, you know, refrigerated box cars were able to ship things throughout the state. The problem is that Wisconsin was actually not known for having good cheese at that time. We were actually known for having really bad cheese. What changed? We went out to all these communities to do, you know, all these speaker series to talk about Greek literature, to talk about mythology, to talk about, you know, math or something like that. And while we were out there, we found experts in these different things. And there were 2 really critical things that came from this and that really influenced agriculture. One was the development of vertical silos. Before that, everything was stored horizontally. Lots of crops would go ahead and just spoil due to oxygen getting in there, critters getting into there, etc. We stored things in vertical silos where we were able to keep our crops fresher longer. Then we ended up coming around and hiring a guy named Stephen Babcock. Stephen Babcock developed a thing called the Babcock butterfat test. At that time, dairy farmers would sell their excess milk that they wouldn't use to creameries to make cheese, and they would sell it by the pound. Well, typically, what they would do is they would add some water into that to get some extra money, or they'd skim the butter fat off the top, which decreased the amount of fat in the cheese. The thing is, that was what was the root cause of us having really, really bad cheese. The Babcock butterfat test literally changed the dairy industry overnight because Wisconsin could actually mathematically prove that our cheese was superior to other states. And that is the reason why we are the dairy state, is because of the Wisconsin idea. And I think that's so damn cool.
Yeah.
My name's Kurt Bertoli, and I worked at UWFox Valley just for a short time, for about 4 years, but it made such an impact on my life that I really felt the need to come here tonight and see this presentation. But I have much more history in the military, and I made the rank of Command Sergeant Major, and throughout my entire life, I always talked to my soldiers about building cohesive teams. And that is exactly what I saw in my short time here at UW-Fox Valley. It did not matter if you were a full professor, academic staff, classified staff, it didn't matter. We all came together as a cohesive team that was always for the betterment of the students in the community. And it just broke my heart to leave back in 1997. And that team just welcomed me. I did not have a pedagogical background. One of my favorite words that Jim taught me was pedagogy. I had to look that one up when I worked in the office. But so accepting, and even though I was only here for a short period of time, I felt it very, very important to be here tonight and celebrate this event.
Well, thank you very much for coming. I appreciate it. Does anybody have one thing that they need to say? I want to be courteous of people's time. We've gone a little bit over time, so if there was somebody who wanted to jump in, otherwise we can wrap it up. I'm going to go to Jim in the back. Sorry, Paisley.
Well, some of it's ending, unfortunately, after all those years, but not all of it has to end. And Catherine Nieswinder and Tom Prance and I have been working as hard as we possibly can to maintain what we call the community assets. The Barlow Planetarium, the Weiser Science Museum, and the Communication Arts Center, and the Children's Center, and the Community Garden. We lost on the Wise. That's going to go to the History Museum at the castle. And what really comes next is still everybody's guess, but there's still a good chance that what was really built not only for the academic community here, but for the broader Fox Cities community can continue into the future. So we're going to continue to work on making sure the Communication Arts Center is available for the theatrical performances that have been taking place in there, the musical performances, who knows what might come next, and try to keep the Barlow Planetarium going as well. Barlow needs a $2.2 million upgrade in order to become, once again, a world-class planetarium. But that's a lot of money, but it's a big deal to have something like that in your community. So don't give up on all of this stuff going away, because this campus was built not just for the students, but it was built for the campus, for the community in general. That's you folks. You're part of the community, and we want that to remain.
And what's the name of your group again?
Save the Fox campus, I believe, right, Tom?
So, and my colleague Paisley Harris, so is another historian. She raised her hand. I said only one more, but I'm not going to silence Paisley. She's a historian and a colleague from the UW-Fond du Lac campus, one of our sister campuses.
Yeah, I was just going to say, those of you who are going on to Oshkosh, bring this with you. And your Fond du Lac friends are also bringing this with you. So I think we can continue to make a good impact there. That's it. 2 cents.
All right, thank you very much, Paisley. Everybody, thanks for coming. I appreciate it.